مشاهدينا مرحبا بكم في حوارات السياق. بعد أكثر من 11 سنة من القطيعة وتبادل اتهامات الإرهاب بين سوريا وتركيا، أجرى وزراء الدفاع ورؤساء أجهزة الاستخبارات لروسيا وتركيا وسوريا محادثات في موسكو، حيث بحثوا سبل حل الأزمة السورية وقضايا اللاجئين ومحاربة الإرهاب. عموما للمزيد من المتابعة حول هذا الملف ينضم إلينا الأستاذ ستيفن هايدمان، الباحث في مركز سياسات الشرق الأوسط في معهد بروكينغز. أستاذ ستيفن مرحبا بك معنا.
I'm glad to be with you.
هل اقتربت المصافحة بين الأسد وأردوغان بعد لقاء وزراء دفاع سوريا وتركيا وروسيا في موسكو؟
I think it's a little too soon to speculate about a possible meeting between President Erdogan and President Assad. We know that the next meeting that's been scheduled will be held between the foreign ministers of Turkey and Syria under Russian sponsorship. And I think what we've seen so far is some understanding about what the elements of an agenda should be for further discussions, but I don't think we've seen much more than that. And so it's a little early, it seems to me, to be thinking about whether the two presidents might meet face to face.
هذا التقارب السوري التركي ما أسبابه وما دوافعه؟
Well, Turkey is interested in exploring normalization with the Assad regime, mostly to secure Russian approval for a military operation in northeast Syria that President Erdogan has been threatening now for many months. Russia has been the principal obstacle to Erdogan's intentions to engage in a military operation. And the condition that Russia has imposed on Turkey is that in order to secure approval for what it wants to do in Syria, it needs to begin these conversations with the Assad regime about normalization. So Turkey is being, I think, guided by an interest of Erdogan's in the military operation he wants to undertake against Syria, on the one hand, which is a product of his perception that this operation will strengthen his electoral possibilities in Turkish elections next summer in June. From President Assad's side, I actually think he is going along with this simply in response to pressure from Moscow. What we've seen from Damascus suggests that President Assad, in fact, is a reluctant participant in these negotiations. The demands that Damascus has introduced into these conversations include some items that are clearly unreasonable, like the status of Hatay province, which Turkey annexed over a century ago. So we have seen a process which is Russian-led, Russian-driven. It's taking advantage of Turkish weakness, of Erdogan's vulnerability at a moment like this, but which isn't yet in a position to really lead us to conclude that it will produce a clear outcome.
حتى الآن يبدو أن المستفيدين من التقارب هم أنقرة وموسكو ودمشق. ماذا عن الخاسرين؟
Well, I think it's clear that if normalization does develop in any significant way, the losers will be Syrian civilians inside of Syria, in the northeast in particular, but also Syrian refugees inside of Turkey. I mean, one of the factors that's driving this is growing anti-refugee sentiment among the Turkish population, which has been cultivated and stoked by opposition political parties, by Erdogan's political opposition, who have taken a very, very hard anti-refugee line in their electoral campaigns. And it seems clear that at least part of Erdogan's interest in normalization is an attempt to outmaneuver his opponents in electoral campaigns and to put himself in a position to appear even more anti-refugee than they are. And so we have two main groups of losers, I think, if this were to move forward. The refugees who will, inside of Turkey, 3.5 million people who will become much more vulnerable to being relocated into Syria, and those civilians who might find inside of Syria, living under opposition control, who have no interest in the return of the regime to their territory, who might find themselves forced once again to live under regime control, or confronting the incredibly destructive consequences of a military operation in northern Turkey. So these are clearly going to be the losers if this normalization does develop.
في موضوع اللاجئين السوريين بتركيا، هناك من يقول أن أردوغان يحتاج فقط إلى وعد بعودتهم إلى بلادهم قبل الانتخابات.
I think that's absolutely correct. I think this is a very focused and very cynical move on the part of Erdogan to undermine his domestic rivals by presenting himself as better positioned to deal with the Syrian refugee presence in Turkey than his opponents are. And so I think if he were to receive any kind of concession from Damascus or any kind of statement from Damascus indicating that the possibilities for refugee return had expanded, he would consider that a success.
ماذا عن الأكراد؟ وما هو السيناريو الذي ينتظرهم؟
There's no question that Kurdish actors in northeast Syria are facing a very difficult political landscape right now. For one thing, it seems unlikely that the Kurdish armed groups themselves would be able to defeat or overcome a massive military operation from Turkey, and so we could see not only a significant military setback for Kurdish forces, but we could see areas that are now under the control of Kurdish groups like the PYD or the Syrian Democratic Forces or the Syrian Democratic Councils fall under Turkish occupation. And in addition, from an American perspective, another very negative consequence of a military operation would be to weaken the ability of Kurdish groups to participate in operations against ISIS. And this is one of the main reasons why the US has been so strongly opposed to the idea of a Turkish military operation, because of what it would mean for the campaign to defeat ISIS in eastern Syria. The US has had a close partnership with the Syrian Democratic Forces. The SDF has been an effective partner in anti-ISIS operations, but the Kurds have made it clear that if the Turks attack, all of their energy will be directed toward opposing that operation, and they will have to step away from anti-ISIS, the anti-ISIS campaign. And so this, from the US perspective, would be a significant setback.
في هذا السياق، إلى أي مدى يمكن أن تتدخل الولايات المتحدة لحماية حلفائها الأكراد؟
Well, I think the US has already signaled in very, very clear ways its opposition to a Turkish military intervention in Syria. And what we heard yesterday from the State Department was the strongest statement yet of US opposition to normalization of the Assad regime by neighboring countries. It was very clear that the US was targeting this negotiation in that statement. And so the US has indicated to Ankara in many different ways, both by its actions on the ground, where it resumed patrols with SDF partners, and through diplomatic statements and outreach to Ankara, that it views normalization as the wrong course of action, that it opposes a military operation, and that any operation that Turkey might undertake in Syria would have significant consequences for the relationship between the two countries.
مسؤولون سوريون قالوا إن تركيا وافقت خلال الاجتماع الثلاثي على الانسحاب من الأراضي التي تسيطر عليها في الشمال السوري. هل يمكن لأنقرة أن تتخلى بسهولة عن تلك المكاسب؟
Well, first, I think we have to treat that claim with a great deal of skepticism. I personally do not believe that Turkey has agreed to withdraw from the areas it occupies in northern Syria. I think that is an objective that Damascus would like to see come out of these talks, but I very much doubt that it has happened yet. In order for this to happen, I think Turkey would need to see very explicit concessions from Damascus on a number of key fronts. And we haven't seen that yet. So this kind of discussion of Turkey's agreement to withdraw, I think is premature, and Damascus is using it to try to put pressure on Ankara to go along with this demand.
ستيفن هايدمان، شكرا جزيلا لك للمشاركة معنا في حوارات السياق.
Thank you for having me.
مشاهدينا، شكرا على طيب المتابعة. إلى الملتقى.